I would ask you to shift your mind back to September the 21st in the year 490 BC. It is a gray dawn, and we stand upon the plain of Marathon, 26 miles from the Greek city-state of Athens. And arrayed below us on the plain this day are 26,000 infantrymen, the soldiers of King Darius, the best fighting men in the world, the soldiers of the largest empire the world has yet seen. They have with them 5,000 cavalry and a vast armada of ships. And they have come with one purpose: to enslave the Greek city-state of Athens, to reduce them to the absolute servitude of King Darius. Darius is master over an empire that stretches from the blue Aegean all the way to the mountains of the Himalayas, from the vast deserts of Bactria and Sogdiana, what we would call Turkestan, to the first cataract of the Nile. He believes that to resist his rule is evil. He is Lord of lords, masters of the four corners of the universe, the chosen of the great god, Ahura Mazda, the Lord of truth. And the Athenians have resisted his rule. They sent a small body of men in ships to aid the Greeks of Asia Minor when they revolted against King Darius. And for that outrage, Darius has sent his troops to crush them. Arrayed on the hills above, near a shrine to the god Hercules, are 9,000 Athenian troops. They have been joined by 1,000 men from the little city-state of Plataea, allied to Athens. But for the rest, they are alone. Sparta, with the most famed soldiers in the Greek world, is unable to come because of religious difficulties. Under the leadership of Miltiades, an Athenian citizen who has lived in Persia and knows at first hand what the tyranny of the Persians mean, the Athenians have made their decision to come out and fight, not to stay behind the walls of their city, but to come out and to meet the Persians in open battle, although they're outnumbered 3-1. The troops of the Persian king have technological superiority. They have an archery corps, men who at 200 yards, with dazzling accuracy, can destroy the symmetry of a Greek military formation. They have heavy cavalry, men and horse alike wrapped in armor, that can ride over Greek infantrymen. They are veterans who time and time again have proved their ability to defeat the Greeks in battle. And they come with destruction in their heart. As they have sailed across the Aegean, island city after island city that has resisted has been conquered, burned to the ground. Inhabitants sent to the vast districts of Asia, the most handsome boys turned into eunuchs, the girls sent to brothels. This dragnet process by which they systematically go through a region with terror and fire is what they plan to do also to Athens, and have already done to the small city of Eretria off the coast of Athens. From the rooftops, the Athenians could see this little city being burned to the ground. And yet still, the Athenians have made their decision to conquer, to fight, to die, rather than be slaves. The men who made these decisions were citizens of a democracy. They governed themselves under laws which they had given themselves. It was the first country truly based on the idea that government should be of the people, by the people, and for the people. It was the assembly of all Athenian citizens, that is to say, all men who served or could serve or had served in the army, meeting together, who had decided to face the Persians in battle. Not as in modern times when old men send young boys out to die. Many of the men in the ranks of the Athenians were in their 50s, even in their 60s. They carried 75 pounds of equipment, roughly equal to what an American infantryman in the Second World War carried. Helmet weighing close to 4 pounds, a shield weighing some 30 pounds, breastplate, greaves, 7-foot spear, and a 2-foot sword. And in that heavy armor, as they reached slightly beyond a mile of the Persian position, heading close to a mile towards the Persian position, they began to run. And as they ran, these citizen soldiers, not professional soldiers, citizen soldiers, carried out the most elaborate possible maneuver. They shifted their line as they ran, moving troops out to the flanks, making the flanks, instead of 8 men deep, some 12 men deep, and made the center line thin and longer. They ran in order to get under the Persian arrows, to diminish the amount of force that the Persian arrows could inflict upon them. They spread their line out because they were outnumbered 3-1, correct? And so what they did was spread out to make their line long enough so that the Persians could not outflank them. Because as long as an infantry formation of the Greek heavy-armed soldier, the hoplite, kept its flanks protected, it was all but invincible. And so now they equal the Persians in length. And then, running at top speed, they crashed into the Persian line. The Persian infantrymen carried a wicker shield. The Persian infantrymen liked to plant that shield in the ground and from behind it, kneeling down, to fire arrows. He had done so, but to little effect because of the speed with which the Greeks had approached. And now it was Persian infantrymen against Greek infantrymen, Athenian against Persian, in the most brutal hand-to-hand combat, where experience and skill and sheer courage were all that mattered. An Athenian infantryman liked to look his foe in the face. It is something he had trained for since he was a boy. And for the Greek, this kind of valor was the height of manhood. And so the Athenian would fix his Persian with a strong gaze, moving back and forth, faking this way, faking that way, and going, wow! And shouting, because a good battle shout was one of the best offensive weapons you had. And then, just for a slight instance, the Persian infantryman would be a little slow in bringing his shield up to his neck, and you struck home, driving that spear deep into his throat. If the spear broke, then you turned to the deadly 2-foot-long sword. And with the cavalry away, the infantry forces could fight on something like equal terms. In the center, the Persians broke through, sweeping everything before them. But on the heavily reinforced flanks, the Athenians broke the Persian line, both on right and left, driving them from the field. And then, instead of pursuing, instead of turning into a rabble, with perfect precision again, the infantry of the Athenians reforms, swings around, and takes the remaining Persian line, the center Persian line, from the rear. At this point, the Athenians in the center who have broken, turn, reform, and the Persians are caught in the middle between them. And now it turns into a rout. 6,400 Persians will die that day. The Athenians will chase them all the way back to their ships and even try to board the ships themselves. And the Persian force is driven from the field. There's one last chance. The Persian army reloads on the ships and begins to sail around towards Athens. There's been a signal from the heights. The city itself may have been betrayed. All the men are out fighting, and the Persian force might capture it undefended. And so a runner, Phidippides, runs those 26 miles from Marathon back to Athens to tell the Athenians, rejoice, we conquer. And with those words, his great heart bursts, and he dies. But the Athenians know not to open their gates to the Persians, and the Athenian army marches back that same day. And when the Persians pull around and begin to pull into the harbors of Athens, they see lined up before them that same brave army they had faced that morning. They wait a while, and then back water. They had had enough of free men for one day. That battle on the field of Marathon would be called by the British thinker James Mill more important to the development of English liberty than the Battle of Hastings, where William the Conqueror won England. It is a seminal date in the history of the world, in our history as Americans, and in the history of freedom. It would not end the attempt of the Persian Empire to crush Greece. That empire was about the size of the continental United States, united under vigorous kings, highly developed administrative structure, vast resources. Every year the Persian king brought in from his empire 14,600 talents. A talent was enough to build a warship, one talent. He had 14,600 of these. Each province paid its own upkeep for the professional army stationed there. It had a superb set of roads, with couriers who could race messages from one end of the empire to the other, proud in their slogan, "Neither rain nor snow nor gloom of night shall keep these couriers from their appointed route." Superb infrastructure, and within its limits a tolerant empire. It was the first empire in history that took seriously the obligations of the ruler to provide benefits for all citizens. The great temple to Yahweh of the Jews was rebuilt at the expense of the Persian king as part of his policy of religious toleration. And Jewish soldiers would serve the Persian king all over his empire. We still find their inscriptions scratched on the stones at Aswan, high up on the Nile. So many were willing to accept the rule of the Persian king. But that's what it was, to accept his rule. For he was absolute master, chosen by God to rule this vast empire. He was the sole source of law, the sole source of policy. And everyone in the empire, from the highest grand vizier to the lowliest peasant in the field, called the Persian king master and called himself slave. Political freedom did not exist for the Persians. There could be no greater contrast between this vast, well-administered, unified empire than the small Greek city-states. Some 1,500 Greek city-states are known, stretching from the Crimea all the way out to Spain. Cities that would become like Marseille or Syracuse. 1,500. Rhode Island would be a large Greek city-state. Some were no more than 3 or 4 square miles, but most of them fiercely independent, proud of their autonomy, proud of their concepts of freedom, which meant their national independence. The whole of the Greek mainland is about the size of New York State. And it was this that the Persians attempted to conquer. Darius died before he could send a second expedition, but his son, Xerxes, whose very name means warrior, decided to march this time himself. And our sources tell us that he gathered some 5 million to crush forever the Greeks. His forces may not have been that large. We have fairly reliable information that his fighting forces numbered 500,000. But that is still far larger than anything the Greeks could put into the field, particularly given their disunity. For when the great expedition of Xerxes began its march, 10 years after Marathon, in the year 480, only 31 cities, 31 of these independent Greek city-states, stood together to resist him. Some of the most powerful of the Greek city-states, like Thebes, openly welcomed the Persian king and joined his forces. This vast armada crossed the Hellespont, where Europe and Asia come together. And when a huge storm came up to destroy the bridges that King Xerxes had built across it, he had the engineers beheaded and then sailed out into the Hellespont in a boat and lashed the waters. "You briny stream, how dare you resist me?" And an even greater bridge of ropes and boats was built, lashed together, and his great army crossed. Day and night the soldiers poured across, kept in the closest possible contact with his mighty fleet. And so came this great juggernaut, and only 31 cities willing to resist. Even the gods for a moment seemed to abandon the Greeks, and the oracle at Delphi told the Athenians, "Flee! I see nothing but disaster," said Apollo. "I see a Persian war chariot riding through your streets. I see the city of Athens in flames and blood pouring out of houses. Nothing can be saved except your wooden walls." And the army came. At Thermopylae, the Spartans, leading their allies from the Peloponnese, cities like Corinth, resisted for several days the Persian king's army. That tiny pass, the Spartans behind a wall. But then their flanks were betrayed by treason. The 300 Spartans died. They stayed and died and left a tombstone. "O stranger, go tell the Spartans that we lie here, true to the death, to our Spartan way of life." The king of the leading Greek state, Sparta, had been killed, and 300 of her soldiers dead. Given the population of Sparta, in manpower, that would roughly be equivalent to 1,800,000 Americans dying in a single combat. So a vast manpower loss. And then the Persian forces on into Attica, and the city of Athens itself captured and burned to the ground. But there, outside of Athens, near the island of Salamis, the Greek fleet, the largest part supplied by the Athenians, the strategy by its statesman Themistocles, fought one of the most decisive naval battles in history. And on a September day in 480, the fleet of the Persian king was crushed, and Xerxes, in humiliation, went back. He left troops still in Greece, and he sent to the Athenians, inside their ruined city, an ambassador to say, "Men of Athens, I want only to be your friend. I make you this proposal. I will make you the leading city in Greece. I will rebuild your city, grander than it ever was. And all I ask is that you be my friend and ally, not my slave." And the men of Athens said to him, "As long as the sun moves across the sky, the men of Athens will fight you." That was their answer. And sure enough, that next year, in 479 in August, the largest army the Greeks would ever send into the field, a unified army under the command of the king of Sparta, 100,000 strong, would drive away the Persians on the field of Plataea. And the great threat of Persia would be gone. And centuries thereafter, every year on the date of the Battle of Plataea, representatives from the cities which had fought there would hold the festival of Zeus the Liberator and drink a toast to the men who died for the freedom of Greece. In that great war against Persia, the Greeks brought together ideas and formed in a clear, coherent, concrete way the concept of political freedom, defining it as freedom to live under laws which you give to yourself, as national autonomy. Despite the grandeur of Egyptian civilization, the pyramids, the Egyptians did not even have a word for freedom. Pharaoh was a god, and freedom did not exist. In Mesopotamia, you could speak of freedom. There's a word for it in Sumerian, for example, as in Akkadian, but it means liberties. That is to say, freedoms that a king gives you and can take away. The concept of self-government is not there. It is the Greeks who developed, discovered, invented, call it what you will, the idea of political freedom. And no nation untouched by the Greeks has ever had that idea. That is our theme in this course, the history of freedom. And we begin it quite properly in Greece and on the field of battle at Marathon. When the Greeks looked back, they wondered at this miracle that this small, disunited people could defeat the might of the Persian king. Two authors, in the aftermath of the war, sought to explain it. One was the Athenian playwright Aeschylus, author of the great trilogy, the Oresteia, one of the greatest playwrights in history. But when he died, on his tombstone, he did not want Aeschylus, the great playwright, wrote all of these plays. No. His tombstone read, This tomb the bones of Aeschylus doth hide, Euphorion's son, fair Gela's pride. How famed his valor, Marathon may tell, and long-haired Persians who knew it all too well. For him, that was the greatest moment in his life, when he had fought at Marathon. And so, to an Athenian audience, in the year 472, only 8 years after Salamis, the audience filled with men who had rowed their boats in the great battle at Salamis, he presented his play, The Persians. And in that play, he puts forth two ideas. It is the only extant Athenian tragedy that deals with a historical event, as compared to a mythological event like the Trojan War. He puts forth two ideas. That the Greeks won because they were free. And as they row into battle, they shout out, row, row for your fathers, row for your ancestors, row for freedom. And their watchword in the critical battle against the Persians was freedom. The goddess Hera and freedom. Gods and freedom linked side by side. The Greeks won because they were free and because the Persians committed hubris. That most remarkable of Greek concepts. It could be defined as outrageous arrogance. The outrageous arrogance of a king beating the waters because they defied him. It means the outrageous arrogance that victimizes the innocent. And in Athenian law, the word hubris means rape, that most outrageous of crimes. It is the sin of pride. And the gods punish it. Sooner or later, they punish it. And the thousands of Persians who died at Thermopylae, Salamis, Plataea, all of these were innocent victims of the Persian king's hubris. So right from the beginning of the idea of freedom, we find the concept of liberty joined to that of morality. And the idea fundamental to the Greeks, that without morality, and the gods who make morality possible, there can be no true liberty. And a nation that forgets this is doomed to perish. So the hubris of Xerxes and the freedom of the Greeks. And this theme was made even more elaborate in the great history of Herodotus. For this struggle against the Persians, this birth of the idea of freedom, gave birth also to the first true work of history, this great epic by Herodotus describing the war against the Persians. Herodotus was not an Athenian. He had fled from Asia Minor, but he recited his great work to an Athenian audience. And they were so pleased with it that they gave him as a reward 10 talents. I told you 1 talent will build a warship, enough to make him wealthy for the rest of his life. And he certainly sang the praises of Athens. He spoke of the love of freedom, which the Greeks held more than any threat. They would fight and die as free men. And he described the hubris of the Persian king, the lashings of the waters. But he read his history at Athens in 444 BC, a generation after the war had ended. And by that time, Athens itself had become master of a great new empire. A bold democracy based upon the idea of equality, an imperial idea of ruling over large numbers of Greek city-states, spawning a tremendous intellectual creativity. And to that audience, Herodotus gave the warning, do not go the way of the Persians. History as we know it was born as a moral instruction. You study history to learn from the lessons of the past. And Athens must avoid that hubris that had destroyed every great nation before it. Our course focuses, in our first set of lectures, upon the Athenian democracy. For the Athenian democracy sets the foundation for the whole concept of liberty. In our course, we will focus upon the ideas and institutions of liberty, seeing them first in the Athenian democracy, Rome of the Republic, and looking at the great contribution made by Christianity to our conceptions of freedom. We will see how these ideas and institutions were put into actuality by great men and great events, because this course insists that history is not made by anonymous social and economic forces. It is made by ideas, by great men and women, and by great events. That is what makes and shapes history. Secondly, we will focus upon the resonance of these ideas through history, how we learn from the experience of the past. For the founders of the United States, history was the most useful single discipline. Not that commerce and business and these things weren't very important, but for every citizen, history was important. For it was history that guided men and women in the awesome responsibilities of self-government, to learn from the past. And for them, no past was more instructive than the republics of Greece and the grandeur of Rome. The lessons of Athens and Rome resonated right on down through history. We'll see how they influenced Christianity, and we will see how Christianity in turn sparked a whole new age in freedom. The second part of our course, we turn to the modern age. The age of the Renaissance and Reformation, of Machiavelli, and of that other great figure, Martin Luther. We see how the idea of divine right of kings all but displaced the concept so important to the Athenians, that government must rest upon the consent of the governed. And then we'll look at the history of the United States, which I believe is the great model for liberty. The American Revolution, the Declaration of Independence, with its proclamation that all men are created equal, and then a Constitution that set about institutionalizing ordered liberty. And we'll trace through to the 19th and 20th century two great opposing concepts: the liberal tradition of the Athenian democracy, of Abraham Lincoln, of Winston Churchill, of freedom under the law, of economic opportunity, of a free market economy, of equality, and face it against the great challenge of the illiberal tradition, a notion that we already find rooted in the Athenian democracy, that might makes right, that the gods care nothing if they exist at all, and that it is the natural character and even right to rule over others. It led to massacres in the time of the Athenian democracy of innocent civilians, and to the Holocaust in our past century. It is a great and profound theme that we will examine, a theme of the utmost importance to Americans, and one which now seems to have issued in a whole new age. And a book has recently appeared called The Triumph of Liberty. But Europeans also thought that at the beginning of the 20th century too. And instead it was that century which saw the greatest of challenges to the concept of freedom. So as we pass through the age of Hitler and Churchill, through Franklin Delano Roosevelt and figures like Ronald Reagan, John Kennedy, we'll end our course, our final lecture, with the question, is it the triumph of liberty? And where will we go? And I look forward to making that journey with you.